Thursday's practice has come and gone, but the big news here is Jaden Rashada is back.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. A special shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications wherever you're getting your podcast, and stay in touch with the show by following me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back in. Today, we are recapping Thursday's practice, and it was an eventful one. The biggest news was that Jaden Rashada is back on Tuesday. We saw him throwing in individual drills. Last week, we saw him practicing some throws just kind of to the quarterbacks back and forth. He was last Tuesday, not this past Tuesday, but last week was just kind of going back and forth. It was just good to see him gripping the football and tossing it to Sam Levitt and Trenton Bourguet, Navi Bruzon in between drills and whatnot. Tuesday, we saw him participating in actual positional drills. He was throwing the football to some of the receivers. He was doing his dropbacks and everything. And today, he was in 7-on-7s. And that's crazy to think. You have to remember that at the beginning of spring ball, our press conference right before we were diving into all of this, Kenny Dillingham said, hey, do not expect Jaden Rashada to be out there. He is recovering from a thumb surgery. He is not going to be playing. He is not going to be participating. He will be present, but he's not throwing the football. Well, what's that saying? Like undersell, overachieve, something like that. And he's throwing the football and he's participating in drills and everything, which no one expected, but yet here he is. And that is such a massive, massive development for Arizona State football, because you're now looking at the future of the program, and he's been banged up. He missed the vast majority of his freshman year, and he was supposed to be out for spring ball. And I know that some people were throwing up some worry signs and kind of like, hey, I don't know how I feel about this. And like, I can understand that because injuries are always scary, but they're part of the game. But now you've got him back on the field. This tells me a lot of things. This tells me that the recovery process, again, like I said, that saying of undersell, overachieve, they kind of gave you that timetable of like, hey, do not expect him to participate, but obviously things are going very well. The surgery has healed good. He's feeling good. He's back on the practice field. That's great news. Beyond great. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better development in spring ball than for Jaden Rashada to be out there. To emphasize the point, we were not under the impression that we would see him. So now that we get to see him, it's like, oh, okay, you've got my attention. You clearly are way ahead of where we thought you would be. The process is looking good for you, and guys are getting moved in throughout what we thought was going to be. I wouldn't call it like uneventful, but you weren't supposed to have Jaden Rashada, Elijhah Badger, Xavier Guillory. You were not supposed to have some of the biggest stars on your team, two of the best players on your team with Rashada and Badger. That obviously kind of made it for public appeal maybe a little less enticing, but yet they're back on the field. And for anybody who wasn't paying attention before, I mean, here's a great reason to pay attention now. The face of the quarterback position and potentially the face of the program for the next 2 years minimum is back out there. Great news. The fact that he's been able to progress this far is remarkable in itself. With that being said, he's still getting comfortable. And you can tell, like, first pass of 7-on-7s got picked off by Kamari Wilson. And to me, I thought the secondary looked quality today. We'll talk about the secondary towards the end of the podcast, but you are still trying to get Jaden Rashada in a groove and comfortable and whatnot. It's not as though he's been participating in every practice. He's only been throwing the football around for a little over a week that we can see. He has participated in team drills one day, and we are just now getting him into 7-on-7s and 11-on-11s. It's a process. We'll get him there. But you can tell that it's just going to be a little bit of a bumpy road to get him back to where he was. Do not expect him to come right back out and be Patrick Mahomes. Like, it's not realistic. What is realistic is understanding that it's going to be bad before it gets good. And that's the case with everyone. It's not exclusive to Jaden Rashada. Just because he plays the quarterback position, just because he's a former 4-star recruit, and every other expectation that has been placed on him, it doesn't mean that he gets to be put under the microscope and have the expectations higher for him than anybody else when it comes to recovering from the injury. I mean, obviously we have higher expectations for him than we do whoever else you want to name, because he is the quarterback. But when it comes to the injury return and the timetable and everything, he needs to be given the same amount of grace and the time that any other player would get. The fact that he is where he is phenomenal. And he's not the only one. Elijhah Badger has also been working himself back into the rotation as well. We were not expecting him the same way we were not expecting Jaden, because Badger was still recovering from the injury that knocked him out of the Territorial Cup in the last game of the season. He was not able to participate and go for that. He is working back in. And it wouldn't be a surprise if he was 100% full go by the end of spring ball, because of the way that we're seeing him get back in a rhythm and getting that chemistry with Jaden Rashada. Those two were connecting in the positional drills. That's great news that you're seeing the progress of these guys who are cornerstones of the team. You're seeing them continually get better and better and better when it comes to getting the reps and getting the opportunities to get onto the training field. You can't ask for much more than that. And they're obviously not the only ones who have had a lot of attention paid to them. Obviously, we're looking at plenty of other guys like Raleek Brown, like Cole Martin, like Ed Woods, Clayton Smith, the offensive line. There's been a lot of attention paid to them as well. And it's going to continue to be that way. But what I'm here to tell you is there's some guys that just aren't getting enough attention, and it needs to change because they're having some stellar spring ball so far. I've got two names that stand out to me. Of course, there are plenty of other guys that are having equally good camps. We're going to talk about the two guys that have caught my attention big time in just a moment. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier than it was before. Prices on GameTime app will actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guaranteed. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Save up to 60% off buying those last-minute tickets for sports, comedy, concerts, theater, and any other events that are going on near you. There's going to be flash deals, so you can save even more with in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event you're going to. Zone deals, look, you pick a section, GameTime's going to choose the seats, and there's big-time savings available for you. The all-in pricing feature is going to show you the total up front. No more surprise fees at checkout. Get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know what to expect when you get there. And the lowest price guarantee of GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and find that you're turning down the volume because of all the shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's hop back into our conversation now and take a look at a couple of guys who really aren't getting enough attention. And I am very guilty of this. I don't feel that I have given these guys the attention that they deserve. These two, for me, they need to start getting more traction. We'll start the conversation with a guy who dominated training camp last year and to me deserved more snaps than what he got. A player who is stuck with the program, and even though he hasn't gotten the workload that maybe he should get, he's still putting in the work, and that's George Hart. And I know that there's going to be some people that don't know who George Hart is. And a big part of that is because he hasn't gotten a ton of touches during his time at Arizona State. But when you're looking at guys who just practice hard, it's him. He's one of the best looking running backs in the room right now. And keep in mind, this isn't a running back room that is devoid of talent. Cameron Scadaboo and Raleek Brown by themselves make this a dynamite room. But then you also have Kyson Brown. Jason Brown will eventually be with the team as well when he joins for training camp. You've got the Carlos Brooks back there. There's no shortage of talented backs. And yet, George Hart, it feels like on a pretty consistent basis, looks like the best back out there. It's very difficult to watch an ASU practice and not see George Hart just flash in front of you. And you sit there and you go, who is that guy? And then you come to realize, oh, this is a veteran running back. Why are we not talking about him more? And I think it's time to start the conversation surrounding George Hart of why isn't he getting more looks? Because he does do it as a runner. He can catch the football well. I haven't noticed for pass blocking for anybody, in fairness. He might be dynamic as a pass blocker. I don't know. That's not something that I am personally looking out for. There's a lot of other stuff I'm looking at. But what I do notice is that this guy is just making plays. As a receiver, as a runner, inside, outside, whatever it is, George Hart's making plays. He was doing this in training camp last year too. And the running back room just didn't really get him enough touches last year. Cameron Scadaboo was consistently healthy for the year. You had DeCarlos Brooks when he was healthy. Kyson Brown got a lot of touches. It was not easy for George Hart to get opportunities. I'm curious if that changes this year. I'm curious if this is finally the year that culminates together and George Hart just explodes. Way big overreaction? Absolutely. But he's now been doing it in last year's training camp and in spring practice this year. At some point, you feel like everything's just going to line up for George Hart. And I really hope that he's going to get that opportunity sooner rather than later because he is a senior and he doesn't have all the time in the world. He's been someone that is consistently put in the effort here. Someone that deserves an opportunity. I'm really rooting for George Hart. And he is absolutely someone that, like I said, it feels impossible to not notice George Hart when you're out there. Here's hoping he can build upon it. Another guy that I want to bring attention to, I haven't talked about him a ton. I've mentioned him before. That's offensive lineman Shaaun NAA. NAA was somebody that Kenny Dillingham said was taking on a big leadership role going into this year. He is somebody that I'm curious where he does end up lining up for the team. But the one constant that we do know about Shaaun NAA is he's going to find his way into the lineup. He's actually been taking snaps at center as the second stringer behind Lee Fontanu. We saw him at tackle and guard last year. He feels like you find a place for him and you get him out there. I am very much of the mindset and mentality of start your best five. Now, that doesn't exclude guys that are only at certain positions. Like, I'm not saying your five best linemen are all tackles. You start your five tackles. Like, there still is some positional value, but at the end of the day, you just need to get your five best offensive linemen out there. I don't care if some guys are better at guard than they are tackle. If he is the best guy and the best option, then he should be out there. You just need to find a way to get your best players out there. Offensive line for me is entirely the most important position, in my opinion, for getting your best guys out there. Because running backs, receivers, defensive backs, linebackers, pass rushers, you can get a rotation in with those guys. But with the offensive line, you want consistency, and you want five guys that are able to build off of each other, communicate with each other. So if that's going to be the case, then I want my five best guys out there so that they can grow, communicate, and turn into a very stout and, good offensive line. What a concept. Shaaun NAA, though, true sophomore, got some time for the team last year, has grown. I want to know what his role ends up being, because with him getting some snaps at center, I feel like this is a really good interior guy. This is a great backup center option, probably a plug and play at one of the guard spots across from Ben Coleman. In theory, people, on paper, that's the way I probably see this ending up going, is Shaaun NAA getting some opportunities across the offensive line. At worst, he's like your sixth offensive lineman, and he's the guy that you bring in for heavy set packages and stuff like that. He's one of your go-to guys if somebody gets banged up. He's one of your go-to guys if you just need somebody to provide better play. At a minimum, for me, he's looking good. He's getting some opportunities. He's getting extra snaps all along the place. Center was pointed out to me. Now that I know that he's getting opportunities at center, it gives me one more thing to pay attention to. But there's been lots of shuffling across the offensive line. Something that I said I wanted to see, and something that we have gotten to see, is lots of different alignments, lots of different combinations. Putting Shaaun NAA at center is just an exclamation point to that. Love it. That's what I said a ton going into spring ball, and what I've continued to say throughout is I want rotation, especially along the offensive line. NAA has been getting rotational snaps. Love to see it. But what has really stood out to me is just the depth that we've seen at certain positions. Like, the offensive line looks good. There's lots of receivers. There's lots of running backs. There's a good amount of pass rushers. There's a lot of guys in the secondary. And the secondary, I felt, had a good day. I know that there wasn't a perfect day from them, but there was some good to take out of it. And we're going to highlight the secondary in just a moment. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and baseball's in full swing, so FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything From slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. One more time, wherever you're getting your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. And of course, a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. We're going to wrap it up talking about the secondary, which there were ups and downs. They are still kind of getting their feet wet with penalties. There were a handful of penalties. The one that stands out was Keontae Bradley, somebody that has been brought to my attention, somebody that I've been paying closer attention to after I was told about him. Had an interception, got wiped out by defensive pass interference. It's a bummer, but the one thing that you can tolerate in training camp is penalties for the most part, especially when you're just kind of looking at one-on-ones and stuff like that. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong, but I want to see these guys be aggressive, see what they can and can't get away with, and then test and see how their ball skills are. So Keontae Bradley getting an interception, that's great. The DPI, not great, but I'll tell you the one thing that I care more about is the ball skills for now. Now, when we get to training camp, different story. That's when you're kind of like, I don't want to see you committing those fouls right now. But I feel like right now is a safe place, a safe situation to, again, like I said, you just test the boundaries, dip your feet in the water. What is going to fly? What is not going to fly? The good news, we don't have Pac-12 refs anymore. So maybe we can finally have some opportunities to not feel like the refs are consistently holding on to their flags and ready to throw it at any given opportunity. That's not an excuse for DBs to be grabby, but I don't know, man. Play around. See what works, see what doesn't work. See what is okay and what's not okay. See where what you're doing in a technical standpoint works and is legal within the book. So you can't do ABC, so then start working on XYZ. That's it. Want to talk about Kamari Wilson, had an interception off of Jaden Rashada. His first pass in 7-on-7s was picked off by Wilson. He is one of the guys that is getting washed aside with all of the names in the secondary because I talk about Montana Warren on every podcast. We look at Shamari Simmons as the veteran. Xavier Alford is coming back. We'll talk about Alford a little more in a moment. You've got Miles Rouser back there. There's no shortage of safety talent, let alone corner, where you've got Laterrence Welsh, Javen Robinson, Ed Woods, Mason Williams, Cole Martin. There's a ton of guys, and it's easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle. But Wilson has strung together back-to-back good practices. He looked good on Tuesday. He had an interception today. Let's see if he can continue to build upon that. This is a guy who's a former 4-star recruit out of high school. So it's not as though the talent isn't there. It's just a matter of getting to that point, unlocking it, getting him comfortable, and realizing that potential. One last guy I want to talk about is Xavier Alford. And Alford is someone that we've talked about before on this show. He's somebody that I have echoed as I wish he got to play last year because not only could you have used a player of his caliber, but he also just deserved to play after everything that he had gone through previously before arriving at ASU. He is picked up where he left off. I brought this up before, so I won't continue to beat the same drum over and over again, but it feels impossible to not bring him up again. If he is going to be on the football field, and there's no reason he won't be, they might have something special here. There are good safeties on this team. Xavier Alford has every bit of an argument for being the best. There are a handful of guys here that can start for other Power 5 teams. There's a handful of guys that should be starting for ASU. Xavier Alford is going to make it very complicated and very difficult for guys to get out there. Right now, if it were my call, I would be doing Shamari Simmons and Xavier Alford and rotate Montana Warren in. And that still is not trying to be disrespectful to everyone else, because you could pick two names out of a hat from the safety spot and say, those are your starters, and I'd go, cool, sounds good. They're all good. Xavier Alford, I don't want to say he's cut from a different cloth, but it really does feel like this kid is just ready to explode. I am so beyond excited for Alford to get back on the field. This is somebody that, if I can give you an overreaction, I think he could be an all-conference player. I think going to the Big 12, he's going to get a bigger spotlight. He is going to be more determined than ever after missing last year for the two-time transfer policy from the NCAA. If everything does end up culminating together, I just have this gut feeling that we're about to see Alford turn in, a superstar season. We'll see. What I do know is that there's a lot of good that we have gotten to see from spring ball so far. The recruiting side, switching topics, Cooper Perry did end up committing to Oregon. Not a surprise. The timing made all the sense in the world from the moment that Rashad Samples left Arizona State to go to Oregon. The biggest chess piece that ASU had to get Perry to commit was gone, and he commits. Not a surprise. But Kenny Dillingham said something at the end of today's practice today. And what he said was along the lines of, he's going to guarantee wins. He wants people who want to be Sun Devils here. And there's a whole other conversation that we can have about that, which we're going to have tomorrow. So now is the best time to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you get an update when that podcast drops. Stay in touch with the show for everything else by following me on Twitter at Richie Bradshaw36, the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. We are covering all the spring ball. We're covering any big news. We're covering basketball. Everything that you need. This is your number one stop. So again, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. I appreciate you guys for making us your first listen of the day. And a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. Like I said, tomorrow we are going to be taking a look at Kenny Dillingham and what he said about guaranteeing wins. We're going to look at how ASU can do that under Kenny Dillingham. I'll see you then. Until next time, keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.